I do not feel that I abuse my discretion when I find the defendant's motion for a new trial on the factual record before me must be denied, and it is so ordered.
No new trial for convicted double murderer Alex-Murdaugh. Former Supreme Court Chief Justice Jean Toll denying a petition by Murdaugh's attorneys today. They were seeking a new trial based on allegations that a clerk of court had influenced jurors. Good evening and thanks for being with us for Murdaugh After Hours. We're joining you with an online in-depth look at how that decision was made today. After a day-long hearing, former South Carolina Supreme Court Chief Justice Jean Toll announcing her ruling shortly after 5 o'clock today. Murdaugh's lawyers wanted that new trial, saying Colleton County Clerk of Court Becky Hill influenced the jury in coming up with a guilty verdict. Hill denied the claims, but Toll said Hill was not credible today. And even if she made some of the comments to jurors she's alleged to have made, the defense had failed to prove that the comments directly influenced their decision to find him guilty.
I find that the clerk of court is not completely credible as a witness. Ms. Hill was attracted by the siren call of celebrity. She wanted to write a book about the trial and expressed that as early as November 2022, long before the trial began. Each member of this jury took their involuntary assignment very seriously. They obeyed the instructions of the court. They obeyed their oath. These good and decent citizens of Colleton County stood to their duty and rendered their verdict without fear or favor. I simply do not believe that the authority of our South Carolina Supreme Court requires a new trial in a very lengthy trial such as this on the strength of some fleeting and foolish comments by a publicity-influenced clerk of court. This is a matter within the discretion of the trial judge, and I am the trial judge at this moment. I do not feel that I abuse my discretion when I find the defendant's motion for a new trial on the factual record before me must be denied, and it is so ordered.
Well, here's a look now at how the day unfolded. The hearing started with the judge questioning the jurors that found Murdaugh guilty of killing his wife and son. One juror said that Becky Hill told jurors to note Murdaugh's actions and watch him closely when he testified in his own defense. She said that this influenced her vote to find him guilty. The remaining 11 members of the jury testifying they were not influenced by anything other than the evidence in the case. Of course, today's main witness was Becky Hill. When questioned by prosecutor Creighton Waters, Hill denied making statements that would influence the jurors. Take a listen.
Did you interact with any juror in an attempt to influence their view of the facts in the State v. Murdaugh case?
No.
All right. Now I want to ask you some specifics about that and some allegations that have been raised. At any time, did you tell the jury not to be fooled by evidence presented by Mr. Murdaugh's attorneys?
I did not.
Hill also facing some tough questions from Judge Toll. Toll pointed out statements from Hill's testimony that differed from things that Hill had written in her book about the Murdaugh trial. Here's part of that exchange.
Well, in your book, you suggest that the guilty verdict was what you wanted, and you were fearful that that a guilty verdict would not be rendered. You say that a lot about your feeling about wanting a guilty verdict, do you not?
I do agree that that is said in the book, and part of that is because I think it was a guilty verdict.
Well, this is that you were describing a time way before the verdict was rendered. When you wrote about those things in the book. Isn't that correct?
It is, yes.
And you even have something where you say that your eyes met with jurors and others at Moselle, and y'all had an understanding, unspoken, that he was guilty. You said that in the book, did you not?
I did say that in the book, and I would consider that part of the literary, the word that we just said. But there was nothing spoken with a juror at all at Moselle.
Well, Murdaugh's defense team later calling on Another witness in the case, Barnwell County Clerk Rhonda McElveen, who helped Hill during the trial. McElveen said that Hill suggested before the trial that they should write a book on the case together.
Well, first of all, she said we might want to write a book because she needed a lake house and I needed to retire. And then further conversations, a guilty verdict would sell more books. And we left it at that. This was before, even in December.
Well, Becky Hill being represented by attorneys Justin Bamberg and Will Lewis. Following the hearing today, they did release a statement saying in part they respect today's ruling by Justice Toll. They added that while Judge Toll described Hill's alleged comments as fleeting, that any interaction she had with jurors in no way influenced their collective decision on the facts of the case. All right, so that's what happened in court today. Brian and Luke Sheely, defense attorneys here in the Columbia area. First, any surprises?
I think you asked us last week what we thought, and I thought he would not get a new trial. It had some moments where you were kind of thinking it could go that way for Mr. Murdaugh, but then, of course, no.
Right. And any surprises with you?
No, JR. I mean, I think the standard that Chief Justice Toll set in the status conference really, it was very narrowly tailored. I think there were some surprises with the testimony of Becky Hill. She was very prepped and ready, but then when Chief Justice Toll got a hold of her, there were some problems there with her testimony. I think that was evident, as she couldn't keep it straight for Justice Toll. But at that point, really, the inquiry was kind of over. They'd already gone through the jurors, and again, with a narrowly tailored Green case that Judge Toll decided to kind of follow that narrow path about you got to show not only that something was said, but it prejudiced the outcome. At that point, the jurors had all answered what they answered, and that was kind of fun and games at that point.
All right, to the average viewer at home, when they heard Judge Toll today said that the clerk of court, Becky Hill, was not credible, and that basically she was wanting the celebrity from writing a book, looking for the limelight, so to say. So she's not credible in the eyes of Justice Jean Toll. You've got a juror saying, what Becky Hill told me influenced my decision. I wanted to make this decision based on what she was saying. So how do you square that to viewers at home? The judge says Becky Hill is not credible, but yet she says there was nothing done here to warrant a new trial.
Well, it does seem kind of confusing, but when you make the rules, then you get to kind of decide how the game is won. And so, unfortunately, in my humble opinion, I don't think the standard was right that they had to show prejudice. I mean, the standard really is that what is the subject of the communication? Is it about getting lunch? Is it about the temperature in the courtroom? Or is it about, don't believe this guilty murderer? So then, she also said the burden had to be to show that the jurors felt that the outcome was different because of that contact. It was all about juror number or letter Z today, who came in off the blocks, very excited, all the stuff that we thought we were going to hear about Becky. And then also that she influenced my opinion, that she made me feel like she thought that Murdaugh was guilty. But then Justice Toll really did a great job of lawyering. She's a very experienced lawyer before a judge. And she impeached her with her affidavit that said originally that the other jurors influenced her, not Becky. And so that was the end of the inquiry. And there's tons of case law that says that doesn't matter. That's the kind of war room back in deliberations. So once that happened, I felt like the proceedings could flow. It really didn't matter what Hill said or how uncredible she looked. The inquiry is over if it's just, if it's just a jury overwhelming you, not Becky. So it was kind of a weird situation, but I was a little dismayed by the way the game was set out.
Mm-hmm. All right, so defense attorneys didn't seem surprised by this today. Alex-Murdaugh, when the camera was on him after the decision was made, he was just sitting there emotionless. Do you think they saw this coming?
I think they're prepared for this. I mean, there was a lot of evidence preservation that we saw, JR. They didn't allow Juror Z to be kind of recalled. So as Luke said, Chief Justice Toll did a really good job of lawyering with that kind of current statement of, I was influenced by Miss Hill. versus the affidavit that really got us this evidentiary hearing, talking about misconduct. That was the strongest affidavit that the defense had. And so I don't feel like the defense was probably super surprised. They brought another supplemental affidavit from Jersey that was then proffered. So it's the way that works, JR, and you've been covering this so long, I'm sure you know, but to the viewers, it's not considered as evidence by the fact finder. So Justice Toles is saying, I'm not going to let you, throw back in another little supplemental bit of testimony. We're done with Jersey. Okay, for the record, I'll let it be a proffer so future courts can look at it, but I'm not going to consider it. And again, their briefs were exceptional in terms of record preservation, sometimes better than the actual in-court examination.
Yeah, I know Judge Toll making reference saying that, everything was just like spot on as far as what she had to go over today. Are you guys surprised that this thing wrapped up so fast? I mean, I think they had scheduled this today, maybe tomorrow, and possibly into Wednesday, but here we are. It's all wrapped up in one full day.
Yes and no. I mean, it doesn't. Justice Toll, especially as a Supreme Court justice, I mean, she was all about efficiency and managing the docket, and she was very direct. And so once she decided that her questions to the jurors were going to be very limited, that really only took up about 10 minutes per juror.
Less than that.
Less than that. And Becky Hill was the longest. And she also precluded the so-called egg lady juror and some other witnesses that the defense had requested or even entertained. So I was a little surprised when she just took 15 minutes to review her notes and then came out with her ruling, because it's pretty easy for a judge to say, well, I'll issue my order in good time, but the world is watching, and I think lots of people probably appreciated that she gave her ruling from the bench. So, but you got 2 other days that were reserved that weren't needed.
Earlier today, there was one incident that happened in court, which when I saw it, I'm like, this can't be good. The jurors that were going to be questioned were actually in another room watching the proceedings on their cell phones. How does that not play into this?
It's not a good look, JR. We had the one juror, X, I believe, who testimony was taken Friday very carefully. There was no live streaming. It was the reporters were embargoed, as you know, JR. They weren't allowed to even discuss what the questions were, for fear that the other jurors would kind of give a heads up of what kind of line of inquiry was coming. And so then to have something as rudimentary as, jurors, and in any kind of jury trial, even this was not a jury trial, it's very common for jurors to kind of give their phones to the bailiffs as they go into the jury rooms, so you're not being influenced. So in a evidentiary proceeding about improper influence, the first witness out of the gate, the other jurors are watching it, so it just wasn't a good look. It was, and then you think about the jurors that were looking at it, where they lie in terms of the questioning. So it was a kind of compounded error upon error.
I'm sure everybody wanted a redo on that.
Right.
Well, the former Chief Justice said that she read the transcript of the case. She had gone over it from start to finish. She agreed with Judge Clifton Newman that the evidence was overwhelming in this case. She told that to everyone in court today, shortly after making her decision. That's a long transcript to go over for a judge in this case. She's well versed in what happened with Alex-Murdaugh and his wife and son now.
Oh yeah, I mean, that would have taken her a long time. She was definitely prepared for this job. There was no way she was going to get up here and not be prepared for any angle of it. I don't even know that it was necessary for her to read the entire trial, because most of what's at issue is behind the scenes allegations of communications, but she definitely was super thorough and knew all the ins and outs and wasn't going to be caught, sitting on her hands in any type of way. And in terms of whether I agree with her or not about the way she set the standard that ultimately decided this case, she certainly represented South Carolina well in terms of, a commanding, thoughtful, very deliberate judge who I think shone on the stage today.
What happens now? Are there any legal recourses for Alex-Murdaugh and his defense team?
Absolutely. And this will be another avenue for the appellate courts. This, evidentiary hearing was granted in part based on the affidavits and the credible evidence presented by the defense. We've now had the evidentiary hearing. There's certainly, at one point, former Chief Justice Toll referring to the Green case. This was in the very beginning of the proceeding today. I think Harpootlian was saying something about kind of you set that standard, and she didn't want to get into re-litigating that. They did that at the status conference, but she kind of indicated that, you know, our appellate courts in South Carolina will have plenty of time to consider, you know, how we you know, deal with the U.S. Supreme Court and some of these other cases saying that you just have to show something was said that was about the merits of the case and not actually show prejudice. So she kind of previewed a long appellate road, JR, and so this is, you know, the appellate system will be starting up again, and this will be just another avenue, maybe one of the defense team's best avenues.
I think the defense team released a statement after the decision today saying their focus now is going to be finding the real killers in this case.
What? That we have after discovered evidence, you know, cases and rules in South Carolina?
Which is what this was all about.
I mean, so yeah, I mean, this is in a perfect world, if they've got real credible evidence of the real killer, then I'm sure that could be investigated by the defense team in combination with their appellate efforts, but
Right.
you know.
Well, the jury's saying the real killer is Alex-Murdaugh.
Sure.
All right, so what happens with Becky Hill here now? Is she going to face any kind of legal consequences here?
She's disgraced. Usually when you're a witness for the government to help them in something they really care about, such as keeping this conviction for Mr. Murdaugh, you don't then get indicted by the government. But you know, there's a federal scope or view of this that could see her in some hot water. But I would say no. I think she's just going to be disgraced. But unless I read something about her cell phone finally being turned over and analyzed, and unless there's something real smoking about that, I mean, it's not going to be about her job here. Now, she might have something else going on with her son that gets her in a little hot water, but I don't think she'll be punished after helping the government in this particular situation.
Right, because I believe before today's hearing, we had heard that there was a couple of investigations underway involving Becky Hill, had we not?
Right, and we had an announcement by SLED, and there were lots of SLED agents sitting right behind, and then later on beside Ms. Hill, but they've announced they have 2 separate inquiries. But again, when you're being investigated by the hand that's feeding you and you do a good job, then typically you're going to get protected. Again, as Luke said, there's kind of some overlapping federal potential interest in Ms. Hill's activities that could overlap. So we'll see. But she did do what, if I were her lawyer, of course, I'm not her lawyer, and I wasn't in communication with the SLED team that are investigating her, but she took a risk today. It so far has worked in her favor in terms of, the Attorney General's office kind of continuing to have that conviction for Alex Murdaugh secured. But you've got one of the most experienced, smartest, and well thought of lawyers in our state saying, I don't find her credible.
Right. A lot of people coming from across the state today and across the Midlands wanting to be in the courtroom for this hearing. Here we are. I think we're like 1 year out from when the trial started. I believe it was the last few days of January of last year when things got underway. Why the continued fascination with this case?
It's just everything that would interest normal folks. Lawyers are supposed to be officers of the court alleged to have murdered or admitting financial crimes. And then you have this very long, protracted trial full of high drama and intrigue. And then all of a sudden you have this huge fumble at the end of it that, gets everybody reignited. Will he get a new trial? Is justice going to be served and he'll stay right where he needs to be? So it just cues up all the old emotions for folks to have another bite at the apple.
All right. We think things are over, but they may not be over because, as you mentioned a moment ago, there's still some appeals processes to go through. So this could be back in the headlines again later this year, I suppose.
Always a chance, JR. Always a chance.
All right. Brian and Luke Shealy, local criminal defense attorneys. Guys, thank you so very much for your time. We appreciate it so much.
Thank you.
And for the very latest on what happened in the courtroom today, be sure to stay with News 19 both on air and online. Thanks for tuning in.